and we got no gas, hot water or lifts for an entire weekend at a block of flats in Hove.
For them, without lifts, it's not really operational to leave. So neighbors step in to bring people in wheelchair up the stairs.
And that was the situation facing the people who live in 55 flats on Kingsway in Hove last weekend after the clean-up following a burst sewage pipe in the basement. That triggered the building's fire alarm to go off, which in turn shut down all services for 48 hours.
The building was unsafe because obviously the fire alarm was no longer operational. The exit doors, front door, everything was unlocked.
And this wasn't the first time a burst sewer pipe presented them with a health risk.
All our bikes were covered in feces, posing a serious public health risk for E. coli or hepatitis A and E.
I mean, that is mighty unpleasant, isn't it? That's the voice of Dr. Dorina Carter, who lives there and has been leading a campaign to get some permanent repairs carried out. I was speaking to her an hour ago.
On Thursday, we realized it's a second burst in another room of the basement where we actually have the bike store. So somebody again triggered the alarm. Neighbors start to realize the contamination was really, really bad, severe, lots of bikes full.
Yes, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Certainly.
Exactly. And we immediately call and we notice it's happening the same thing. The cleaner is expected to do that. So I went downstairs. I actually spent the entire Friday taking day off just to deal with this.
Also, earlier, I spoke to Valerie Abraham, who lives there too.
Well, obviously, not having hot water is an enormous issue. And also, watching neighbours, disabled neighbours or neighbours with young children and pushchairs and everything, having to schlep up many flights of stairs. And in the case of one neighbour, she actually had to be carried by other neighbours up to her flat. It's a very, very distressing thing to see.
Joining me now is Suzanne Mooner from the Social Housing Action Campaign. Hello, Suzanne.
Hello there.
Hi. As we were hearing earlier, I mean, these flats on Hove seafront, obviously beautiful views of the sea and all that, fairly new block, and you've got people who own their flats there, but it's also, there's some social housing in that. And that's the way of kind of modern building, isn't it? A bit of both.
Yeah, there's a lot of mixed, tenures now, and mixed development.
Which comes as part of the planning permission and all of that. But when something goes wrong like this, what do you think about the swiftness of how these issues have been dealt with? Because the sewers have burst twice in that basement over the last couple of months.
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out that these problems are happening even with very new build properties. But obviously quite a lot of the social housing stock is very old. Actually, a lot of it was originally built as council housing. So it goes back to the 50s, 60s and 70s. So some of it is very, very old. And there's nothing wrong with that. And, a lot of old buildings are really well built, but they need to be maintained, don't they? And that's what we're not seeing. So then we start to see the mould, the damp, sewage bursts, like you've got doors and windows not fitting properly. So a whole host of disrepair problems. And it seems particularly galling when it's a social housing provider, when it's a housing association or a local council, and you really think that they should be doing better.
And maybe it's fortunate for residents here. Just give me a view on this, where you have somebody like Dorina, who was willing to take a day off work to take some action here. The residents got in touch with Peter Kyle, the local MP, who intervened as well. And maybe some groups aren't empowered like that.
No, that's absolutely right. So it shouldn't have to depend on who you know, whether you're able to get through to your local MP, whether your local MP is willing and able to assist you, whether you happen to have, someone who is a GP, for example, who can intervene on your behalf. And even then, I mean, we get a lot of complaints at SHAC. We get a lot of complaints from MPs and councillors who can't get these big commercialised housing associations to actually come in and do the repairs. There was a story in the press at the moment about another child who has died in a mould-ridden home. And obviously, a couple of years ago, we saw the death of little baby Awar Bishak. Their parents had really tried, in both cases, had really tried to get the landlord to address the disrepairs, the mould and damp, and it killed their child, but they've never been able to get the landlord to come in and address the problem. These aren't impossible problems. These aren't things that would be, impossible to actually repair. They can do it. In the second case, they actually moved the family out into temporary accommodation the day after. And so that accommodation was there. They just hadn't been put in it prior to this, tragic incident. So the housing associations and the landlords generally are just really not delivering on what they should do.
And so who hold those organisations to account?
Well, that's absolutely hitting the nail on the head. The real problem that we have is not that the legislation is lacking. There is legislation that requires landlords to provide homes fit for human habitation. The problem is enforcement. Who do you go to? And the whole reason that we are seeing a major campaign like from our group and for other groups and, councillors and MPs having to intervene is because they are unaccountable. There is no one really holding them to account. The worst that they can suffer is a fine that is a fraction of their turnover, that is really meaningless when it comes to their finances. And that's the worst that they're going to face in any of these cases.
Okay.
So what we need to see is actually meaningful enforcement of the existing legislation. We don't need new legislation.
Right, and just a final thought for Suzanne, perhaps other people living in social housing like this, and if an issue like this pops up with them, what would your advice be? Who do they turn to in the first instance, or if they're getting no joy from their housing association, where do they go next?
Yeah, so there are organisations like the Housing Ombudsman that they can reach out to. In the first instance, they need to complain to their landlord, but don't leave it. If your landlord doesn't respond, turn to your local campaign groups, your local tenants unions, for example, organisations like SHAC, and also talk to your councillor and talk to your MPs because they can actually intervene on your behalf. So just make a big fuss is all you can do at the moment to get the attention of your landlord onto the problem. And there are lots of groups that can help with that.
Suzanne, thanks so much for talking to us today. Suzanne Mooner there from Social Housing Action Campaign. So a couple of statements here for you. First of all, we did invite Clarion onto the programme. That invitation remains open, but nobody was available. They gave us this statement. They say, "We apologise to our residents at Kingsway who've been affected by these issues. The disruption of services over the weekend should have been resolved more promptly and will be reviewing what went wrong to prevent this happening in the future. We had teams working on a range of issues on Friday and over the weekend. Services were restored on Sunday and are now functioning normally. Following complaints from the residents, from the 1st of April, we've taken control of managing all services in-house. We're fully committed to providing a good level of service for our residents and will continue to work at pace to address the concerns raised." So that's from Clarion. And Peter Carl, the MP for Hove, as we heard earlier, residents got in touch and try and get the repairs underway. He wasn't able to talk to us today, but gave us this statement. Peter Carl says, "The ongoing crisis at Kingsway is truly shocking. It should not require intervention from an MP to ensure the clean-up of the second raw sewage leak in the residential block in a month. There's still no running water in the basement. And over the weekend, residents were left without hot water in their flats. Compounding these issues, the building's lift have been unreliable since construction." Sorry, I had to have a proper cough. "Compounding these issues, the building's lifts have been unreliable since construction, despite assurances from Clarion that resolving them was a priority. Instead, disabled residents have been forced to rely on neighbours to carry them up the stairs when the lifts fail." And Peter Carl says, "On Friday, I spoke with Clarion and they assured me they'd address the crisis and I await their response this week." Peter Carl there, the MP for Hove.